I'm Barbara Garrity Blake. It is September 24th, 2016, and I am in beautiful downtown Washington talking to Miss Billie Mallison, and she will say her full name in a minute, but this is a Coastal Voices project. We are here to talk a little bit about the James Adams Floating Theater. So thank you, Billie.
I'm glad to talk with you.
Okay, so we say your full name and the name of this wonderful place we're sitting.
Okay, I'm Billie Jean Mallison, and we're sitting at the historic Port of Washington Museum. We're just private people who love history, and we're very interested in our maritime history. We were born during the Revolution. We've had a major role in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and beyond.
Yeah, and we're sitting in front of this amazing painting of the Washington Waterfront.
Yes, that's from about 1880 to 1920. We put together postcards and old pictures that people had and research. My father-in-law had some research, and the artists painted what Washington looked like during that period.
And I'm struck by how much, how water-oriented the town was, because you can see a railroad with a lumber yard. You can see various railways, boat building,
That's right.
businesses.
You had the old sailing ships still going to the West Indies at that period, up until around the turn of the century, and you had the steamships being built and repaired in Washington during that era, and you had the railroad.
Well, that's really, y'all are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Bringing this history to the public eye. So what I wanted to ask you specifically about was a boat that was created right here in Little Washington, I believe, called the James Adams Floating Theater. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. James Adams commissioned it here from the Chauncey Boatyard, right here downtown at the bottom of Bonner Street, where the St. Peter's Episcopal Church is. And it was commissioned in 1913. It was finished in 1914. We had the very first performance here. They towed it from Bonner Street up a couple of blocks to the Fowle Warehouse, and that's there was a big wharf there, a big dock. That's where they gave their first week's performance. So so it was very exciting.
And what was the boat before it was a showboat? What was it?
It was a lumber scow, approximately 128 feet long, and James Adams, who had a very successful history in circus and vaudeville, designed it himself and had it built. It had a capacity of over 500 audience. It looked like a big Kleenex box on top of a big, long barge, basically.
Can you tell me about your father-in-law?
Yes. My father-in-law was born approximately in 1925, and he and his family had a long history here in Beaufort County and in Washington. They loved Ocracoke. They had a close connection to Ocracoke. And he remembers as a child going aboard the James Adams, and they gave him a tour, and behind the stage there were the dressing rooms, and he remembered touching the velvets, and he remembers the costumes, how shiny the brocades, and he told me that they gave very excellent theatrical performances there, so that's his recollection. Of course, the James Adams plied the coastal area up until the 1940s, so it had a long history, and it would come back here periodically to be worked on at Chauncey's, especially in the earlier years. And of course, Edna Ferber, who wrote Showboat, we feel was inspired in part by the James Adams, and she of course met it in Bath, which is in Beaufort County. It's only about 15-minute drive from here. She, we believe, was on board it, went to Belhaven, and all. So it was a very exciting, interesting showboat.
And it seemed like the showboat went to these little backwater areas as opposed to, say, Norfolk and, the larger cities. Why was that?
Well, he wanted an audience that was really excited to come and see it, and he experimented with different ports. I mean, at one point he was in Wilmington and he was in Norfolk, but he preferred all these small towns, and so he went wherever he could. Basically, he went to all the areas, even into like you say, into Williamston and the small. They went in on very small rivers and creeks.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so your father-in-law, was he in Washington when he saw the showboat?
Yes, it was here in Washington.
And what was his name? I'm sorry.
His name was Frederick Mcelhaney Mallison.
Okay. And he was a historian.
He was a local historian.
And
yes.
what did he write?
Well, he was always interested in history, and he'd give tours to the Boy Scouts and that kind of thing, and he'd speak at the History Association and that kind of thing. But he was a businessman by duty, but when he retired, he got to do what he loved, and he went back and got his master's in history and specialized in maritime history, and he wrote a book that was published, The Civil War on the Outer Banks, and he also wrote Childhood Memories of Ocracoke, and he had just a wonderful time. He taught North Carolina history here at the Beaufort County Community College and all that, and had a wonderful time. He did not live very long after that, but he's left a lot of papers. We have a lot of papers about ships and boat building and that type of thing, early history.
And is
Washington.
That what inspired you to get involved with this effort?
Listening to his stories and all, it inspired me to get involved with history. And I've been here in Washington for about 35 years now. So
that's great.
Yes,
that's great.
It is.
Can you tell me about the importance of Washington as a port of trade and how it related to New Bern or compared to New Bern?
Well, around 1850, we were the number 1 shipbuilding town in North Carolina, even we have our own long history of shipbuilding. So, and of course, it was the ports were fluid. Boats went all over. They went to New Bern, New Bern, Washington, Ocracoke, and up the coast and to the Caribbean. So everything was connected by water.
It's almost like back then it was more connected to the wider world in a way than towns today are.
Well, Beaufort County has the Pimlico River, which is part of the Pimlico Sound system, and it completely bisects the middle of Beaufort County, which is a very long county. So the river runs through our entire Washington, through the entire county. So we're still very much connected to the water. It's not far from you, no matter you see it, no matter where you are. Most people have some connection. They have family connections of people who fished or who made their living on the water. So sometimes we take it for granted, but it's very much a part of us, of Washington, of Beaufort County, of this entire area, and so we must not forget it.
Yeah.
Not take it for granted, and not Washington is still settled by people who find us because of the water. We have a lot of people who brought their sailboats in here for years, and when they retired, they decided to settle here. Someone just left the museum.
My husband.
So the water is still a part of us, and that's why tourists come to this. They're interested in the water, the river town, the beautiful old buildings and the old wharfs and all that, and they don't always know the history, but they're attracted to it. They're attracted to the water, and they're attracted to the historic ambiance of these towns.
And good for the town for retaining as many historical buildings, it seems, as they can. You haven't had that whole revitalization, the idea that, all things historical.
All things old are not bad.
Exactly.
We need to save some things from our heritage, which are very valuable. Some of our stories and our people's wisdom, we need to save those things. The whole North Carolina, the South, and its literary tradition is based on people sitting around on Sunday afternoon and talking and telling stories about their families. So, our heritage is, our roots are very strong here.
And how long has the Port of Washington Historical Program been up and running?
We opened our doors in April of 2015, so it hasn't been very long.
Yeah, so you're practically newborn.
We are. We're newborn. We're just a group of citizens that have a love of history, local historians, amateur historians. We researched and put all this that's on the walls. So.
That's great. Are you a historian?
I'm a person I'm a mini scholar. I've always been a person that's been curious and liked to read and look things up.
Yeah,
so
nice.
I'm basically, I have a social work background. I worked here for 25 years. I've driven all through the county.
As a social worker?
As a social worker. So I've heard a lot of interesting stories and about old ways, and it's still very rural out in the county.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Billie, for taking the time to chat with me today.
Well, it's fun to talk about these things that are important to me, so thank you.
Yeah.